For 12 years, Daniel believed his marriage was the quiet kind of success people rarely noticed. 2 careers, a suburban home outside Seattle, dinners that ended with the soft hum of the dishwasher and the glow of city lights beyond the window. Then one night, his wife Olivia left the house wearing a dress she hadn't worn in years, and said she was meeting a friend. But sometimes, a single evening can expose the cracks that 12 years carefully hid. And sometimes, the truth waiting at the end of that night costs far more than anyone imagined. If stories about love, loyalty, and the dangerous secrets behind closed doors speak to you, stay with me a little longer. The house in Bellevue was quiet in the way expensive suburban homes often were. White hallways, soft lighting, and windows that framed the distant glow of Seattle across Lake Washington. Daniel Carter stood at the kitchen island, slicing an apple he didn't intend to eat. Olivia was upstairs. He could hear the faint rhythm of a dresser drawer, opening, closing, opening again. For 12 years he had known every sound in this house. That was why tonight felt wrong. The knife paused in his hand. Footsteps descended the staircase. Olivia appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing a dark blue dress he hadn't seen in years. The fabric caught the light softly, elegant in a way that belonged more to a cocktail lounge than a quiet Thursday evening. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Going somewhere special? Olivia hesitated for a fraction of a second, too short for most people to notice. Daniel noticed. Just dinner, she said casually, setting her phone in her purse. Meeting a friend. Which friend? The question floated in the air longer than it should have. Olivia turned toward the mirror near the door, adjusting her hair. Claire, she said. You've met her. Marketing conference last year. Daniel leaned back against the counter. He knew Claire. Claire lived in Chicago, but he said nothing. Instead, he studied his wife the way someone studies a photograph from long ago, trying to understand how something familiar could suddenly feel distant. You look nice, he said quietly. Olivia gave a quick smile. Thank you. She moved toward the door. Daniel noticed the perfume. Different, new, something subtle and expensive. He remembered when she used to wear it only on vacations. Don't wait up, Olivia said lightly, slipping on her coat. Daniel's voice followed her before she opened the door. Olivia? She turned. For a moment they simply looked at each other. 12 years of birthdays, arguments, mortgage payments, and ordinary mornings sat silently between them. Yeah? Daniel's expression was calm, too calm. Just, drive safe. Relief flickered across her face. I will. The door closed. The house returned to silence. Daniel stood still for nearly a minute. Then he reached into the pocket of his jacket on the chair beside him and pulled out his phone. The screen lit up. A message thread. Olivia plus Ethan. He had found it 3 weeks earlier. At first he thought it was nothing. Old college friend. Friendly conversation. But the tone had shifted slowly. Dangerously. Tonight's message was still visible. Ethan. Table's ready. Can't believe it's been 12 years. Daniel stared at the screen. His jaw tightened. Outside, Olivia's car pulled out of the driveway. For a long time, Daniel didn't move. Then he picked up his car keys. Not angrily, not impulsively, just quietly. Because sometimes the moment that destroys a marriage doesn't begin with a fight. Sometimes it begins with a dinner reservation. Rain had begun to fall over downtown Seattle by the time Olivia stepped out of the rideshare. The pavement shimmered under streetlights, reflecting the glass towers that rose above the city like quiet witnesses. Across the street, the restaurant glowed with warm amber light. An upscale place tucked between a wine bar and a boutique hotel. The kind of place people chose when they wanted a conversation to feel important. Olivia paused before the entrance. For a brief moment, she considered turning around. 12 years of marriage had trained her instincts well enough to recognize the weight of a decision. But then her phone vibrated. A message. Ethan, I'm inside. Window table. She exhaled slowly and stepped through the door. Inside, the restaurant hummed with quiet conversations and the clink of wine glasses. The scent of roasted garlic and butter drifted through the air. Ethan Reynolds stood when he saw her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked older than the version Olivia remembered from college, his jaw sharper, hair touched slightly by gray at the temples. But the confidence in his posture hadn't changed. Olivia Carter, he said with a soft smile. She laughed nervously. Ethan Reynolds. They hugged briefly, too carefully to be romantic, yet not quite casual enough to be harmless. When they sat down, a small silence lingered. So, Ethan said finally, glancing at her. 12 years. Olivia looked down at the menu but wasn't reading it. Yeah, she said. It's strange seeing you again. You look exactly the same. That's a lie, she replied. Okay, Ethan admitted. You look better. She smiled despite herself. Outside the window, rain streaked slowly down the glass. A waiter appeared with water and wine menus. Celebrating anything tonight? He asked politely. Ethan glanced at Olivia. Just catching up. When the waiter left, Ethan leaned back in his chair. I wasn't sure you'd come. Olivia traced the edge of the wine glass with her finger. Neither was I. And yet here you are. She met his eyes. That doesn't mean anything. Ethan's smile carried a hint of amusement. It never does. At first, Olivia felt a small pulse of unease. You haven't changed, she said. Sure I have, he replied. I just hide it better now. They ordered food, salmon for Olivia, steak for Ethan, but neither seemed very interested in the menu. Instead, they talked. About college, about careers, about the strange way time had passed without asking permission. At one point, Ethan asked, gently, Are you happy? Olivia didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window again. Daniel's face flashed briefly in her mind, the way he had looked at her in the kitchen. Calm, observant, almost distant. My life is good, she said finally. That's not what I asked. The silence stretched between them. Meanwhile, 30 minutes away in Bellevue, Daniel sat alone in the dim light of his living room. The television was on but muted. His laptop rested open on the coffee table. On the screen was something Olivia had never imagined he would see. Not just the recent messages, the entire thread. Months of conversations. Daniel scrolled slowly. Ethan, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't broken up? Olivia, sometimes. His jaw tightened slightly. Another message appeared. Ethan, dinner sometime? Just to catch up. Olivia, maybe. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The rain tapped softly against the window beside him. In the restaurant downtown, Olivia laughed at something Ethan had just said. The sound felt natural, dangerously natural. Ethan watched her carefully. You know, he said quietly, I always thought we ended too early. Olivia looked at him. That was 20 years ago. Still counts. She shook her head. You're impossible. Maybe, he said, but you still came. Olivia felt a flicker of warmth and guilt at the same time. She reached for her wine. Far away in Bellevue, Daniel stared at one final message. It had been sent 2 days earlier. Olivia, Thursday night works. Daniel closed the laptop slowly. The house around him was silent. For the first time in 12 years, he realized something unsettling. The dinner wasn't a betrayal. It was only the moment the truth finally stepped into the open. 3 weeks earlier. It had been a Tuesday night, ordinary in every possible way. Daniel and Olivia had eaten dinner at the kitchen island. Grilled chicken, a salad Olivia had barely touched, and a half-finished bottle of white wine sitting between them. Afterward, she had gone upstairs to take a shower, while Daniel cleared the dishes. The house felt comfortable then. Predictable. 12 years of routines had built a quiet rhythm between them. When Daniel finished loading the dishwasher, he noticed Olivia's phone still lying on the counter. The screen lit up. A message. It wouldn't normally look. In 12 years of marriage, Daniel had never once checked her phone. But the notification preview caught his eye before he could turn away. Ethan Reynolds. I can't believe we found each other again. Daniel stood there for a moment, his hand still resting on the counter. The name meant nothing to him. He told himself it was probably a coworker, a client, an old friend. But the next message appeared before the screen dimmed. Ethan, talking to you feels like college again. Daniel felt a small shift in his chest. Not anger, not yet. Just curiosity mixed with something colder. He picked up the phone. The message thread opened with a simple swipe. The first few messages were harmless. Hey, is this Olivia Carter from UW? Oh my god, Ethan? 20 years later and you still remember me? Daniel scrolled slowly. The early conversations were light, nostalgic jokes about professors, memories of dorm parties, half-forgotten friends. But something subtle changed as the days passed. The messages grew longer, more personal. Sometimes they appeared late at night. Do you ever think about that summer before graduation? Sometimes. I still regret how we ended things. Daniel sat down at the kitchen table. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the room. He kept scrolling. Olivia never crossed an obvious line. She never said anything explicitly romantic, but the tone soft, reflective, slightly intimate, felt different from the way she spoke to anyone else. Daniel wasn't naive. He understood emotional gravity when he saw it. Upstairs, the shower turned off. Daniel locked the phone and placed it exactly where he had found it. By the time Olivia returned downstairs in comfortable pajamas, he was sitting on the couch watching the news. She sat beside him, leaning her head briefly against his shoulder. Long day, she murmured. Daniel nodded. Marketing campaign launch? Yeah, she sighed. He studied her face for a moment. She looked completely normal, comfortable, trusting. What are you watching? She asked. Market updates. Thrilling, she teased. She kissed his cheek before standing up again. I'm going to bed early. Okay. He watched her disappear upstairs. That night, Daniel lay awake much longer than usual. Not because he believed Olivia had betrayed him, but because he understood something else. People rarely step directly into betrayal. They drift. A message becomes a conversation becomes a habit becomes a secret. Over the following weeks, Daniel noticed small details he might once have ignored. Olivia smiling at her phone, typing late at night, turning the screen slightly away without realizing she was doing it. Daniel never mentioned it. Instead, he observed, not out of suspicion alone, but out of fear of being wrong. If he confronted her and nothing was happening, he would introduce distrust into a marriage that had survived 12 years. But if he waited, he might discover the truth. And that was how Daniel Carter found himself sitting alone in his living room weeks later, staring at the glow of his laptop while Olivia laughed in a restaurant 30 minutes away. The discovery hadn't happened tonight. Tonight was simply the first time the secret had stepped outside the house. The restaurant had grown quieter as the evening deepened. Most of the early dinner crowd had already left, replaced by slower conversations and lingering glasses of wine. Outside the tall windows, Seattle's rain had softened into a fine mist that blurred the city lights. Olivia barely noticed the time passing. The salmon on her plate had gone cold. Across from her, Ethan leaned forward with the relaxed confidence of someone who had nowhere else to be. "Do you remember the rooftop party after graduation?" he asked. Olivia laughed softly. "The one where you tried to convince everyone you could play guitar?" "I can play guitar." "You knew 3 chords. 3 excellent chords." She shook her head, smiling. For a moment, it truly felt like stepping backward in time. The years between college and now seemed strangely thin, like a curtain that could be pulled aside. But memory had a dangerous quality. It removed the complicated parts of life. Ethan watched her carefully. "You were the only person there who believed I'd actually start a company someday." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "I didn't believe you." "Sure you did. I believed you were stubborn enough to try." He smiled at that. "And look how that turned out." Olivia tilted her head. "I read about your company. Fintech startup, right?" "Yeah. Impressive." Ethan shrugged slightly. "It's mostly stress and investors pretending they know more than they do." She laughed again. The waiter appeared, quietly refilling their glasses. Neither of them asked for the bill. Outside, the mist thickened into rain again. Ethan rested his forearms on the table. "So tell me something real," he said. Olivia looked at him. "Something real?" "Yeah, not the resume version of your life." She hesitated. "What do you want to know?" Ethan studied her for a moment. "Are you happy?" The question landed differently this time. Olivia didn't answer immediately. Her fingers traced the stem of the wineglass slowly. "I have a good life," she said. "You said that earlier. It's still true." Ethan leaned back slightly. "That's not the same thing." Olivia looked down at the table. The restaurant noise faded into the background. Daniel's face appeared in her mind again, calm, steady, familiar. The man who had built 12 years of life with her. Mortgage payments, Sunday grocery runs, quiet evenings watching documentaries neither of them finished. Stability. But sitting across from Ethan felt different, unpredictable, charged with the kind of attention she hadn't felt in years. "You ever feel like your life just settled?" Ethan asked quietly. Olivia looked up. "What do you mean?" "Like you built something solid, responsible, but somewhere along the way you stopped asking if it was still the life you wanted." The words hung between them. Olivia felt an uncomfortable recognition. "I chose my life," she said softly. "I'm sure you did. That doesn't mean it's wrong." "I didn't say it was." Ethan's voice remained calm. "But sometimes people choose the safe road before they finished exploring the other ones." Olivia studied him. "And you think that's what happened to me?" "I think," he said slowly, "that when you walked into this restaurant tonight, you looked like someone remembering a version of herself she hasn't seen in a long time." Olivia's pulse quickened. "That's a dramatic interpretation." "Maybe." Ethan held her gaze. "But you didn't have to come tonight." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. The truth was simple. She had told herself this dinner was harmless, just conversation, just curiosity. But sitting here now, she could feel something shifting inside her, a quiet permission forming where certainty used to be. She picked up her glass. "Two old friends," she said lightly. Ethan raised his own glass. "Two unfinished stories." Their glasses touched softly. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Across the lake in Bellevue, Daniel Carter sat alone in the dim living room of his home, the laptop screen casting pale light across his face. The message thread remained open. His eyes rested on a sentence Olivia had written 2 weeks earlier. "It's strange talking to you again. It feels like waking up a part of myself I forgot." Daniel read the line again, slowly, carefully, not with anger, but with the quiet recognition that something inside his marriage had already begun to move beyond his reach. Back in the restaurant, Ethan reached across the table, not dramatically, just enough for his hand to rest lightly over Olivia's. The contact lasted only a moment, but neither of them pulled away immediately. Sometimes betrayal didn't arrive with a single decision. Sometimes it appeared quietly hidden inside a moment that felt harmless. The house was dark when Olivia stepped inside. It was nearly midnight. Rain clung to her coat as she closed the front door quietly, instinctively trying not to wake Daniel, even though she wasn't sure whether he would be asleep. She slipped off her shoes near the entrance. The living room light was on. Daniel sat on the couch. The television played silently in the background, its muted images shifting across the screen without sound. For a brief second, Olivia froze. "You're still up," she said lightly, placing her purse on the chair. Daniel looked over. His expression was calm, almost neutral. "Yeah." He reached for the remote and turned the television off. The sudden quiet filled the room. "How was dinner?" he asked. Olivia shrugged casually, walking toward the kitchen. "Good." Claire sends her hello. Daniel watched her pour a glass of water. She drank half of it quickly, her back turned toward him. "Claire?" he repeated. "Yeah." "In Chicago?" The words landed softly. Olivia's hand paused on the glass, just for a moment. Then she set it down. "She's in town for work." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's convenient." Olivia turned around. Something in his voice made the room feel slightly colder. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm fine." The answer came too smoothly. Daniel leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees. "Olivia, how long have you been talking to Ethan?" The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Olivia stared at him. "Excuse me?" "Ethan Reynolds." Daniel said the name calmly, like someone mentioning a coworker. Color slowly drained from Olivia's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel reached to the coffee table beside him and closed the lid of his laptop. "You met him tonight at the restaurant on 4th Avenue. Her breathing changed. "You followed me?" "No." His voice remained steady. "I read the messages." Olivia's chest tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller. "How long?" she asked quietly. 3 weeks. The number hung between them. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of Daniel knowing. "Why didn't you say anything?" Olivia whispered. Daniel leaned back into the couch. He studied her face in a way that felt both familiar and strangely distant. "I wanted to see where it would go." Olivia felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Defensiveness, shame, confusion. "It was just dinner," she said quickly. "We were catching up, that's all." Daniel nodded slightly. "That's what the messages said at first." She crossed her arms. "You went through my phone." "I saw a notification," he replied quietly. "After that, I looked. That's still an invasion of privacy." Daniel held her gaze. "Is it?" The question was simple, but it carried something deeper underneath. Olivia looked away. "It didn't mean anything," she said. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood and walked slowly to the kitchen counter, where Olivia's phone rested beside her purse. He didn't touch it. He simply looked at it. "One message," he said calmly, "stood out to me." Olivia felt her stomach tighten. Daniel spoke without looking at her. "You wrote, 'Talking to you feels like waking up a part of myself I forgot.'" The exact sentence echoed in the quiet kitchen. Olivia closed her eyes briefly. "It was just a feeling," she said softly. Daniel finally turned toward her. "Do you think feelings don't matter?" His voice was not angry. If anything, it was tired. That's how most affairs start. Olivia's chest rose sharply. "We didn't do anything." Daniel nodded. "I know." The way he said it unsettled her even more. "You know?" "Yes." "Then why are you acting like I betrayed you?" Daniel's eyes rested on her calmly. "Because you did." The words were not loud, but they were final. Olivia felt heat rise to her face. "You're overreacting." "Maybe." Daniel walked back toward the couch. But tonight wasn't the problem. Olivia stared at him. "Then what was?" Daniel paused before answering. "The moment you decided not to tell me." The quiet honesty in his voice was far more painful than anger. Olivia realized something slowly then. Daniel wasn't fighting for control. He wasn't trying to win the argument. He was simply watching the truth unfold. And that realization frightened her more than any shouting ever could. Daniel picked up his car keys from the table. "I'm going to take a drive," he said. Olivia blinked. "At midnight?" "I need some air." He walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped briefly, not turning around. "Good night, Olivia." The door closed softly behind him, and for the first time that night, Olivia Carter felt the quiet, unmistakable weight of what she had risked losing. The next morning felt strangely normal. Sunlight filtered through the kitchen windows, falling across the marble counter where Olivia stood pouring coffee. The rain from the night before had cleared, leaving the quiet suburban street outside bright and still. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe the previous night had simply been an uncomfortable conversation. Marriages survived arguments all the time. 12 years couldn't collapse over one dinner. Footsteps approached behind her. Daniel entered the kitchen wearing a gray sweater and the same composed expression he had carried since midnight. "Morning," he said. Olivia glanced at him carefully. "Morning." He opened the refrigerator and took out orange juice. Neither mentioned the conversation from the night before. The silence between them was not tense. It was worse than tense. It was polite. Olivia placed a cup of coffee near him. "Do you want toast?" "I'm okay." He drank his juice slowly, then checked his phone. The calmness unsettled her. She had expected something else, a lecture, anger, a demand for explanations. Even a dramatic ultimatum would have felt easier than this quiet normality. "Daniel," she said cautiously. He looked up. "Yes, I meant what I said last night." "About what?" "That dinner didn't mean anything." Daniel nodded once. "I heard you." His voice was neutral, not forgiving, not accusing, simply acknowledging the words. Olivia waited for him to say more. He didn't. Instead, he finished his drink and placed the glass in the sink. "I have an early meeting today," he said. "At the office?" "Yes." He grabbed his coat from the chair. "Daniel," she said again. This time her voice carried a trace of urgency. He paused at the doorway. "What happens now?" The question hung in the air. Daniel studied her for a moment. "Right now," he said calmly, "I'm going to work." "That's not what I meant." "I know." He slipped on his coat. "We'll talk later." Then he left. The door closed with the same quiet finality it had the night before. But Daniel didn't go directly to the office. Instead, he drove into downtown Seattle and parked near a building overlooking Elliott Bay. The brass sign in the lobby read, "Whitman and Keller Family Law." Daniel sat in the car for several minutes before going inside, not because he doubted the decision, because he understood what the decision meant. The receptionist greeted him politely. "Good morning, do you have an appointment?" "Yes," Daniel said, "with Laura Whitman." A few minutes later, he was sitting in a quiet office with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water. Laura Whitman, a composed woman in her late 40s, folded her hands on the desk. "So," she said gently, "what can I help you with?" Daniel took a slow breath. "My wife and I have been married 12 years. Laura nodded. "And?" "I believe our marriage may be ending." She didn't react with surprise. People rarely visited her office for happy reasons. "Are you certain?" "No," Daniel said honestly, "but I need to understand my options." Laura opened the folder. "Do you have children?" "No." "Shared property?" "A house in Bellevue." She made a few notes. "Is there infidelity involved?" Daniel hesitated. "Yes," he said quietly. "Documented?" "Messages." Laura nodded again. "Sometimes people come here in anger," she said carefully. "But you don't seem angry." Daniel looked toward the window. The gray water of the bay stretched toward the horizon. "I'm not angry," he said. "I'm adjusting." That evening, Olivia arrived home first. The house felt strangely hollow. Daniel's laptop bag rested on the dining table. But something else had changed. A small stack of documents lay neatly beside it. Olivia walked closer. The first page carried a simple heading, Property Division Overview. Her chest tightened. The realization arrived slowly. Daniel wasn't shouting. He wasn't threatening. He was preparing. The stability she had once complained about, the predictable life, the quiet routine, suddenly felt fragile in a way it never had before. For the first time since the dinner, Olivia understood something unsettling. The price of that night might not come as a fight. It might come as silence. And silence, she realized, could dismantle a life much more effectively than anger. The house felt different after the documents appeared on the dining table. Not louder, not colder, just unfamiliar. Olivia had lived in that Bellevue home for nearly 8 years, long enough to know how sunlight moved across the floors in the afternoon, and which steps on the staircase creaked after midnight. But for the first time, the rooms felt temporary. Daniel had not mentioned the papers. He had simply placed them there, as calmly as someone setting down mail. 3 days had passed since then. 3 days of quiet routines. He still went to work. They still shared the same kitchen. They still said good morning and good night. But something essential had shifted between them. Daniel spoke politely, but his voice carried a distance Olivia had never heard before. It wasn't anger. It was absence. That evening, Olivia found him in the living room reading on his tablet. The lamp beside the couch cast a warm circle of light across the rug. For a moment she stood in the doorway, watching him. 12 years. How could something that long feel so fragile now? "Daniel," she said softly. He looked up. "Yes? Can we talk?" He placed the tablet down without hesitation. "Of course." Olivia sat in the chair across from him. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers loosely intertwined. For several seconds she didn't speak. Daniel waited. Finally she exhaled. "I've been thinking about what you said." "Which part?" "The part about the moment I decided not to tell you." Daniel's expression remained neutral. That was an important moment. Olivia nodded slowly. "I didn't understand that at first." He didn't interrupt. "I kept telling myself the dinner didn't matter," she continued, "that it was just conversation. And now?" She looked down at her hands. "Now I think the problem started long before the dinner." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Explain." Olivia hesitated. The words felt heavier than she expected. It wasn't Ethan, she said finally. Daniel's eyes rested on her quietly. I know. Olivia looked up, surprised. You know? Yes, he spoke calmly. Ethan was just the person who happened to be there. The clarity of his answer made her chest tighten. I didn't realize how empty I'd been feeling, she said softly. Daniel studied her. Empty? She nodded. Our life became so structured, she continued. Work, bills, schedules, vacations planned months ahead. Everything was stable. That's usually considered a good thing. I know, her voice cracked slightly, but somewhere along the way I stopped feeling like the person I used to be. Daniel remained silent. I think when Ethan started messaging me, she said, it reminded me of a version of myself I thought I had lost. You mean the version before responsibility? Maybe. The room grew quiet. Olivia forced herself to continue. But that doesn't mean I wanted to leave our life. Daniel's expression didn't change. Yet you hid it. Yes. She swallowed. And that's the part I regret. The word regret lingered between them. I didn't realize what I was risking, she said. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Did you stop the conversation with him? Yes. When? The night you confronted me. He nodded once. And I told him it couldn't continue. Daniel absorbed that quietly. But the truth, Olivia said, is that the real problem wasn't Ethan. She met his eyes. It was the fact that I never told you how lost I was feeling. Daniel's gaze softened slightly, though the distance remained. Why didn't you? I didn't want to sound ungrateful. For what? For the life we built. The words hung in the air. Olivia leaned forward. I know I hurt you, she said quietly, and I know trust doesn't just come back because someone apologizes. Daniel didn't respond. But I want to try, she said. Try what? To fix this. The sentence trembled slightly as it left her mouth. I'm not asking you to pretend nothing happened, she continued. I'm asking if there's still a chance for us to rebuild something honest. Daniel looked toward the window. Outside, the evening sky had turned deep blue. The city lights across the lake flickered to life. For a long time he said nothing. Then he spoke. You waited until the ground started disappearing beneath you to say these things. Olivia felt the truth of that immediately. Yes, she admitted. Daniel turned back toward her. And that's the hardest part for me to understand. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Do you think it's too late? Daniel didn't answer right away. Because sometimes the most painful question in a marriage isn't whether love once existed. It's whether it still exists after trust has been quietly broken. He looked at her carefully. And Olivia realized that whatever answer came next would determine the future of everything they had built together. 6 months later, autumn arrived in Seattle. The leaves along the quiet streets of Bellevue had turned gold and deep red, scattering across sidewalks after the first cool winds of October. The air carried that familiar Pacific Northwest chill, clean, sharp, and reflective. Daniel Carter had moved into a smaller apartment overlooking Lake Union. It wasn't luxurious, but it was quiet. The windows faced the water, where early morning boats drifted slowly through mist that rose from the surface like breath. Most mornings, Daniel stood by the glass with a cup of coffee before leaving for work, watching the city wake up. The divorce had finalized 3 weeks earlier. There had been no courtroom drama, no public conflict, just signatures, paperwork, and the quiet closing of a chapter 12 years long. Daniel's co-workers noticed subtle changes. He worked slightly later now. He took longer walks during lunch. Sometimes he sat alone on the waterfront steps near his office, staring out toward the gray horizon. But there was something steadier about him too. Not happier, just clearer. The life he once built had collapsed quietly, but it had also forced him to rebuild something honest inside himself. Peace, he realized, often arrives slowly, and sometimes it arrived only after loss. Across the city, Olivia Carter sat in a cafe near Capitol Hill, her laptop open but untouched. Outside the window, people hurried along the sidewalk carrying umbrellas and paper cups of coffee. The city continued moving the way it always had, but Olivia felt like someone who had stepped slightly outside of its rhythm. Her job remained the same. Her apartment, now smaller, sat in a modern building downtown. Her social circle still existed. From the outside, very little had changed, but internally, everything felt different. She had met Ethan once more after the separation. The conversation had been brief, awkward. Whatever spark had existed between them during the dinner months earlier had dissolved almost immediately. Without secrecy, without the emotional tension of the forbidden, the connection revealed itself as something smaller than she had imagined. Ethan had eventually returned to New York for work. They exchanged occasional polite messages, nothing more. And slowly, Olivia began to understand the painful truth. Ethan had never been the real center of the story. He had simply been a mirror reflecting the dissatisfaction she had never admitted to herself. But the moment she stepped toward that reflection, something real had shattered behind her. Trust. Stability. A marriage built over 12 years. The cafe door opened. Cold air drifted inside. For a brief moment, Olivia looked up, half expecting to see Daniel walking through the door the way he once might have. But it was only a stranger. She lowered her gaze again. Regret, she discovered, did not arrive as a dramatic emotion. It arrived quietly, in small realizations, in empty spaces where familiar routines used to live. That evening, Daniel walked along the waterfront as the sun set behind the Olympic mountains. The sky turned deep orange before fading into blue. He paused near the railing overlooking the water. 12 years. He thought about them sometimes, not with bitterness, not even with anger, just with the quiet recognition that love alone was not always enough to protect a relationship. Trust required something more fragile, honesty, and timing. When that timing failed, even good intentions could arrive too late. Daniel slipped his hands into his coat pockets and continued walking. Some stories ended loudly, others ended in silence. And sometimes, the true cost of betrayal wasn't revenge, punishment, or humiliation. It was simply two lives slowly moving forward, separately, learning in their own ways what trust had once meant, and why it mattered so much once it was gone.